Hello and welcome back to the Madness and Meaning podcast. Today's episode is primarily inspired by a book that I just finished reading that sparked a conversation between Amanda and I as we were preparing for this podcast because we had planned to talk about something completely different, which we will probably talk about another time because I am excited for that topic. But this con topic feels a lot more alive in us right now, and especially me having just finished a book that made me cry more than any other book has ever made me cry. I feel like this is just going to be really juicy and hopefully is going to pull on some emotional strings of the listeners here, which is really what we're all about is resonating and speaking more fully to your essence and your soul and not just trying to give our listeners concepts to intellectualize more fully because that is what most of the personal development space is. It's all about teaching you concepts, helping you understand why you are the way you are and why things that are the way that they are and what you need to do in order to overcome that. And I think we do talk about those things and those things do have a time and a place, but there is this aspect of the soulful human journey that is, to put it simply, about coming back to feeling the journey back to the full spectrum of the emotional experience. And this book that I read is Dare to Feel by Alexandra Roxo. Highly recommend. She has another book as well that I read last summer called Fuck Like a Goddess. Also fully recommend. She is amazing. She's also a Pisces queen, so I resonate with her in that way. I think you would too, Amanda. She's beautiful, she's gorgeous, she's everything. And I love that she also speaks a lot in poetry. So she's just a full Piscean and a Piscean goddess in her essence, and I love everything about it. And her book, Dare to Feel, was an amalgamation of stories of her life that were representing the human experience of what causes us to close our hearts and the opportunities that we have to reopen them from closing them from trauma, from closing our hearts to the experience of heartbreak or disconnection or distrust or a rupture of some kind. And every single story in that book resonated with me so deeply, even if I didn't have direct experience with that exact same thing that she was writing about. And so I really love the idea of kind of approaching this topic today around the journey back to feeling, sharing a bit about our own journeys and our experiences of what has uh, closed our hearts in our lives and what that has been like. What is it actually? What is the experience of having a closed heart and living life with a closed heart? How does that show up in different aspects of relationships, romantically, platonically, inside of career and work life, and your relationship with yourself, and socializing and adventure and all of that? Like it, living life with a closed heart is so normalized. And I think today it would feel really good to me if we could start to plant this seed for people around how this way of living or this experience of life that is just so normalized that it might not be one, the best way of living life, that there might be something else available that would be meaningful enough for people to explore their curiosity around. And two, why living life with a closed heart might actually be harmful and something that we have meeting towards wanting to change for our own personal lives, but also for the collective of the planet, which is very much where this book kind of led to in the end around like what, like, imagine a world where everyone dared to feel the depths of their emotional experience and had safe spaces to just grieve and to suffer and to also feel fully love and joy. Like, what if when we were suffering, we were invited to sit in that fire in a safe space and we're supported inside of that instead of told the steps that you need to do to overcome it? Or we're guided down a journey of learning to numb it on your own with substance abuse or, whatever, all the different modalities that we have of numbing our emotions. Imagine a world where like there was just acceptance of the entire human experience and this normalization of suffering as a human and not making it wrong or a problem to fix, but something that is just invited in as something that we all get to hold ourselves through and also get to hold other people through. And what would that change in the world? What power dynamics would naturally disintegrate, and how much of world hunger and violence would naturally fall away if we were all just invited to more safely feel the full spectrum of our human experience. And I think that concept and that possibility is so potent. I can feel the power of it in myself just moving through my own journey. And I'm not anywhere close to what's possible for me, I think, in regards to learning how to feel my feelings, but just having experienced an awakening to my own numbness and learning how to more fully land inside of my body, especially in suffering and in pain, rather than staying up in my head trying to problem solve. What that has done for me is unspeakable. Like, it is so powerful to learn how to sit in the depths of suffering and also how to open myself to receive more fully bliss and love and joy. Because, and I said this in a recent blog post that I wrote, I think the majority of my life, especially like early adulthood, was spent oscillating between anxiety and numbness. And only in the last probably year have I started to crack open the spectrum of my emotional experience to be able to feel more on either side of that spectrum. More pain, definitely. I've grieved a lot. I've been in the depths of so much sadness and heartbreak and fear, more so than I think I ever have in my life. Like, being inside of that experience in my body, shaking, crying, just like wanting to yell out in how much pain I was and allowing myself to sit in that fire. But I've also like experienced so many more moments of just like sitting with a friend and being so giddy and overwhelmed with just like love and joy and just like squealing at how like joyful I am in that moment. And it's just so beautiful to be able to experience that full spectrum. So I'm excited to dive into this.
As you were talking, a lot was coming to me. So I
Of
might take this
course.
in a direction and we'll go from there.
Let's do it.
I've often heard, and this is not necessarily something that I've received directly from my guides, but that the Earth experience is one it's a very emotional experience where we do have a very wide range, and wide spectrum of emotions. And that's part of what we come here to experience. And that's what makes this so special, is that you can't really have it like this anywhere else.
Mhm.
Because when your level of consciousness is more expanded, you don't see things in the same way. And so you don't feel the same shame, or you don't feel the same levels of excitement, because everything is just love. And so it's a little bit more one note, or you're not as identified with the experience, and so you're seeing it from a different way, maybe a
Mhm.
more detached way, a more observational way than it is that we experience here. And what's interesting is that when we're born as infants, all we do is feel. We're not thinking about things logically. We're not necessarily identifying with what we're thinking. We're just feeling. We're just feeling hunger, or we're feeling love, or we're feeling peace. It's all
Yeah.
feeling. And when you look at babies, they're just so fluid in their body. Everything is just they're screaming or they're just quiet or they're
They're
giggling. It's like,
giggling.
yeah, it's very much an extreme. And then over time, that window sort of narrows and the spectrum of emotions sort of dims a little bit. And you sort of operate in this more narrowed spectrum of feeling
Yeah.
where it's either happy or it's frustrated. It
Yeah.
doesn't get to this hopelessness or despair, or it doesn't get to bliss. And if it does, it's one end and you stay there, or it's the other end and you stay there, and or not for long periods of time.
Yeah.
And there's judgment of it, and there's all these other things mixed in. And when I was thinking back over the course of my life, feeling things has never been an issue for me. I think that my window is naturally potentially larger than the average person's. However, when I look back over my life, feeling hopelessness, feeling massive shame, massive fear, massive pain was highly accessible,
Mm.
but the opposite wasn't. I didn't fully let myself feel joy, love, bliss. And I remember specifically stopping myself from it
Mhm.
because, well, there's suffering in the world. You shouldn't be able to feel that. You're not, if other people can't, then how dare you indulge in that? And sort of closing myself off from those experiences, not letting myself let it in. And I think that that's interesting. I think that we do that. We sort of tell ourselves that we can't experience the extremes of the spectrum and we can only live in a very narrowed place inside of it. And there's something either undeserved about some of those feelings or something scary about some of those feelings. And I would love to hear what some of your wisdom on that is.
Sure. Yeah. When you were talking about like how that spectrum closes and like it's either like happy or frustrated, what I what I heard was almost like you know how we're always like asking people casually like how are you? And we just
Fine.
respond good. Yeah, I'm good.
I'm fine. Yeah.
I'm fine. Or like and then that just creates one very narrow specific opposite to that. It's like it's good or bad. Fine or not fine. And that is the awareness and the availability that we have of our emotional experience, and it's so normalized, isn't it? It's like if why is it? Why do we have such a narrow spectrum of emotions? Like why did we have to adapt to that? And I think a big part of it is the conditioning of our emotionality being the thing that threatens our ability to have our needs met.
I was just going to say that it like
Yeah.
narrows productivity to a certain
Yeah.
extent. Yeah.
Yeah. It also pushes away our interpretation of love and receiving that from the outside. I think so many of us have our own experiences of interpreting that when I'm in my full spectrum of my emotionality, I'm too much, I'm a burden, or there's something wrong with me. And that causes people to close off, to leave, to maybe become inauthentic around me because they're uncomfortable. And so we start creating these associations in our mind of the spectrum of emotion that is safe for us to be inside of in order to get the love, the safety, the connection, and the support that we deeply need in order to survive.
And what's interesting is that it actually limits us in so many ways
Yeah. And
because
that's the irony.
it is, well, it works and it doesn't work depending
Yes.
on your frame of reference, depending on
Yeah.
how you want to show up in the world. For me, I went to school. What's so interesting, and I'm just processing this now, is I went to school for theater. where feeling is a big part of the job, not only from a performance perspective, but from a creation perspective. Everything I was doing was about creation, and it comes from an emotional, sensory place. And then I shut that off and I went back to school to study science,
Ah.
and everything was from a logical place. And I felt at the time, I didn't realize it, but I felt looking back, I was very stifled. That creative bone in my body wasn't getting itched, but I felt like it was better that way because I was going to make more money and I was going to have a place in the world that allowed me to be financially more stable. And I felt more secure inside of who I was because of all those things. And like the box inside of which I found myself felt more secure,
Mhm.
even though I didn't feel as good inside of it. And then when I switched careers again and I started exploring my intuition, it's all sensory. That's
That's right.
what it is. Your ability to pick up on other people's the information from other people. I'll just say it that way. You're picking up on what they're feeling by feeling it yourself.
Mhm.
That's all it is you're feeling more things. You're feeling the energy around you. You're feeling the sensations and the emotions and the interpretations of other people and yourself. And you can get a lot more information that way. And you can channel it in a way that you can't from a logical place. And so, from an energy frequency perspective, it also can have a very impactful way of creating what you want, experiencing your reality in a different way. And so that's also another interesting thing that's coming to me too, is it offers you a lot, but you have to be interested in exploring that and seeing that as an asset.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that that has been a lot of my learnings and awareness expanding around like, why would I even want to feel?
Right.
You know, because I think that the comfortability and the normalization of having such a narrow spectrum of the emotional experience, it's also so validated.
Yeah.
Like in everyday life, how are you? Good. Like, you just know that if you were to say anything other than good or fine, that that's just going to be an uncomfortable experience
Yeah.
for
Well, you're
you and
taking
for
up
that other
time. The
person.
other person doesn't really want to know and just asking you. You know what?
Yeah.
I was on social media the other day and someone, this was so fascinating to me. They were saying how in many other countries, they get irritated by North Americans visiting because they'll say, "How are you?" And in
Oh,
their cultures, they don't really interact that way because it feels disingenuous.
and it is.
Because here it kind of is.
It totally is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Living in Australia, first of all, it's really cute. Instead of saying how you doing, they say how you going. And something that I've noticed is that and it's still quite automatic and not authentic, but people do share at least a little bit more authentically to the question, how you going? It's not an automatic like good or fine. Fine, how are you? It's more like, oh, I'm doing all right. You know, like they're a little bit more honest, I've noticed, which is really interesting. And it's also been interesting for me to experience my automatic discomfort with that. Because I'm not used to, in that exchange, knowing how to hold that.
Maybe we should navigate that next
Yeah.
because, and this is something that I want to touch on in more detail maybe next week. But when I started working with you, was really when I started allowing myself to open up to those more positive, you could call them, emotions that I had been not allowing myself to access previously. And as I started feeling more love for me, as I started feeling more happiness inside of who I was, I started talking about that more. And I noticed that that made people very uncomfortable.
Mm,
They didn't really want to hear about it. They didn't want to see
yeah.
it because they didn't know how to hold for that when they couldn't feel it themselves.
Hmm. That's it. That's totally it. And your ability to have compassion and understanding for that experience in someone else, I think, is the grounding point to being able to not take it personally.
Yeah,
Because when we take it personally, then we close again, because it's a threat.
right.
It feels threatening. But my experience of being able to witness my own discomfort in the presence of other people's honesty about what they're really feeling and being honest about the depth of their emotional human experience allowed me to have compassion for um when I am met in a moment of confrontation that confirms my bias that I am too much for sharing authentically and honestly, because that is going to be a part of the experience. When you are opening, when you are allowing yourself to be inside of a larger spectrum of the emotional experience, you are going to be met with resistance, with other people's discomfort, maybe a bit of judgment, whether it's outward or just something that you can intuitively sense. And that can be used so easily as justification to stay closed,
Sorry, I'm just receiving a lot of information as you're
right?
talking. Um, what I'm being shown is that everything is felt sense. Everything. Like everything is energy. Everything is technically felt sense. But when we analyze what we're feeling, then we physically shut down a little bit, like physically, like our physical anatomy tenses and closes. And that's ultimately what we're feeling when we don't want to feel something, is that like pushback against the energy that's passing through. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
what could be a really interesting conversation is like, why though? What is so threatening about opening to sensation again?
Mm.
Where that's essentially where we come from as infants.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is that associated threat of when I am in sensation, I will not have my needs met. There and it becomes logical. It becomes intellectualized as far as like and it lives in the body as like a knowing, like a conditioning. But I think we learned it from our belief systems and interpretation of like when I felt sad, mom left. Or when I felt sad, other people laughed at me. Or when I felt angry, people abandoned me. And so we associate these sensations and like really being inside of the full spectrum of them as the reason why bad things are going to happen to me that I want to try to avoid happening again.
And as a byproduct of operating that way, we also limit so many positive experiences too. And
Mhm.
having to rewire that does take time. Like finding safety inside of letting in pain is understandable to me. But I also find it fascinating that we limit excitement, bliss. And you know what's interesting is Taylor Swift has been on this incredible world tour, and I've been watching people talk about their experience at her shows and how much they get swept up in the ecstasy of the experience
Mm.
and how it's like a drug and they want to go back because they've never been able to access that before.
Wow.
Isn't that
And
interesting? It's
it's the
just feeling.
permission of the room.
Yes, they're giving themselves permission to feel that. And growing up in my early 20s, the only time I ever felt free was when I was at the club dancing or when I
Mm,
was in a dance class, when I was allowing myself to open up to that more than I typically would.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's a brilliant point to knock on people's reflection is like, where are you allowing yourself to access a deeper emotional experience? Because those can be points of safety that we can expand inside of and more intentionally bring our like presence to. Because if we are able to find these spaces, these places, these people, these activities that have innately made it easier for us to open and to feel more, whether it's more of the depths of sadness and grief or whatever, or more of the depths of bliss and ecstasy and joy, whatever it is, wherever you are able to dip outside of the normal limits of your emotional spectrum, I think is where we can start to create more safety through intentionality and then allow that to carry forward into our lives. As I'm saying this out loud, I'm thinking to myself, okay, but have we actually given anyone listening a reason to want to do that? And I think that we need to go there first because we are talking
Let's.
about like how it's so bad that we don't feel and how we should feel more, and blah, blah, blah. But like, why? Like for people that are listening, I think that we're making it quite clear that the journey back to feeling is a hard one. And it's also a long one. It's quite tedious. And if not feeling or staying inside of this pretty small, hardened spectrum of emotional experiences is normalized, is validated, is comfortable, why would we want to do the work to step outside of that? What
You
is your
wouldn't.
first answer to that?
I don't
Yeah,
think that it's necessarily something that you need to do. I think it comes down to recognizing what's available for you inside of it and deciding for yourself, is that what I want? There is no right or wrong with it. And I really want to make that clear inside of all of our conversations is I don't want to pick a side because there isn't really one. I don't have a vested
sure.
interest in one over the other. I think if you disallow extremes of emotional experiences, I think that there are a lot of positives inside of that, especially if you're a more cerebral type of person. It's going to be extremely uncomfortable for you to start to drop into your body where you don't necessarily feel comfortable. And especially if you have a job that does require a more logical type of way of operating, then it's helpful to be able to compartmentalize that way and to not allow yourself to get carried away into those extremes. Or if you have had an experience in the past where you did allow yourself to get carried away inside of an emotional experience that led to an outcome that maybe you felt abandoned, or maybe you felt ashamed, or maybe you felt a loss of some sort or a disappointment, why would you want to relive that? And so it's
Yeah.
perfectly normal and okay to not want to and to choose not to. But what
Mm.
are some of the positives? Or did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I
Okay.
love that you use the word to choose not to, because I think that is what it needs to come down to is people need to make a informed choice. And I think most of us just haven't been given the opportunity to make the choice. We're just living unconsciously into this numbness and this shortened spectrum of emotional experience. And as you were speaking, I and you were talking about how like it works for some people, like that is genuinely what they want. Immediately, some person came to mind that I've been close to in the last year. And the primary difference, like the stark difference between this person and I, is how much more intensely I feel. I feel everything so intensely. And he's very like calm and more grounded and doesn't feel like a whole lot of excitement or joy, but also like never gets into the depths of like depression and grief and everything that I fall into sometimes. And that was so made obvious in our relations with each other. And I remember very starkly having a conversation with him around how, and I was leading with my own bias of it would be better if you felt more. You know what I mean? And I was projecting my own experience of like having gone from really, really numb and then seeing how that wasn't serving me and then opening up to more emotions and like how, you know, deciding for myself that I wanted to choose that instead. I was like, oh, if you only knew how much better your life would be if you allowed yourself to feel more, then you would obviously choose it. And I remember trying to like convince him of that, and he was not buying it. And I really I really struggled allowing that to be okay for a while because I'm like, he just doesn't get it. He just doesn't know the negative consequences that come from him kind of just like staying in this like one neutral state all the time, never getting really excited, never getting really sad. But the more I explained it, the more I realized that he was hearing what I was saying and he still didn't care. And eventually I was able to come to a place of acceptance of like, oh, that feels like the best option to him and to probably other people. Like living life where things are kind of just like cruisy and neutral and like, you never really feel so much excitement and love and joy and bliss and ecstasy, but you also never really feel like the depths of grief and so like when things are going wrong in your life, you're kind of just like, okay, whatever. And when things are going good, you're kind of like, oh, great, whatever. Like that feels like the best case scenario to some people. And what I really want to emphasize is like what you're saying, choose that, but choose it if that's actually what you want. Don't just unconsciously fall into that because that's what you think your only option is.
What I'm seeing is like he does feel it, but he has like a dam up. And so it just
Mm.
kind of like trickles in.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you and I kind of let the open the dam,
Dams
let it
bust
all out,
open.
and then we like to surf the wave.
Yeah. And
And I think,
sometimes we get lost in the wave.
sure, but it's like it's not possible necessarily to not feel. It's just the
Yeah.
way that you're interacting with that
Yes.
energy. Yeah,
Totally.
yeah,
Totally. And there's shadow sides to both experiences that I
sure.
think is important as well. Because like I was so focused on like what's wrong with you not feeling so much? It's that like, you kind of get avoidant or like when things are going like bad for me, like you can't really be compassionate and you get a little bit closed off. And I'm like, see, you should be feeling more because if you did, all these problems would go away. But also like the shadow side of where I'm at, where I'm a busted up dam and just like it lost in the rapids of my emotional experience is that sometimes it does get too much and I can't function very well, or that I do react inside of my relationships or maybe fall into sabotaging patterns that I then have to work on healing that rupture. And it can be a lot
There,
sometimes.
there's a learning lesson on both sides, and you came here to learn one end of it, and he came here to learn the other end of it, which is to
Yeah,
find your happy medium, which is very interesting. You
it
came together in
is.
that way. Um,
Yeah.
but what I would love to explore is the other side of this. Like, what are the positives
Hmm.
now in allowing yourself to feel that deeply?
Mm. And this is where I think like it's crazy to me that some people might not resonate with it because it lives so strongly in my body as like a duh. But I don't think everyone has this. But there is just this innate desire to live. like to really be in the eros of life, like to actually like I've always loved drama and romance and like watching all like I love involving myself in it. And weirdly at the same time, so much of my life was numb because I had this disconnect between like what I desired, what the like this innate experience of wanting to just feel everything and experience everything, like wanting to feel so in love, wanting to feel the heartbreak of losing that love, like wanting to like just there's just like this innate desire in me, but also I was terrified of it based on earlier life experiences that taught me that it wasn't okay to feel that. And so coming back to it has shown me that like life, when you're living it, when you're feeling the depth of it, is just an experience that I want to have. Like it's so entertaining. It's it is just like wow, like me on my deathbed being able to be like, look at the fires I sat in of deep deep heartbreak and grief and sadness, but also look at how much I fucking loved and like the times where I would be in tears laughing and peeing my pants with my friends. Like I want that to be my human experience that I reflect on my deathbed.
Can I say something really off tangent, like about your soul in particular?
Please. Do you
You,
tell I'm
I
an
feel
Enneagram 4, by the way?
me.
No, I'm an Enneagram 4.
Well, as you're talking, I'm just getting like all this information. I don't know that you have had a ton of lifetimes on Earth.
Mm,
So you want to come in and just soak it all up.
I've gotten that
At
before
least
too.
this time, like
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I wanted to have it all. Like I just want to experience like in this very like excited way. Your higher self was like, well, if I'm gonna go there, I might
Yeah.
as well just experience all of it. And I think that there are some people that come into this earth experience um, with maybe a little bit more karma, trauma, intentional desire to experience a more limited capacity of things because need the adjustment period.
Hmm.
Whereas your soul was like, oh, I just want to go in, make a splash, and get as much.
Yeah, that is what it feels like. And like perfect that I chose to be a Pisces Sun, Scorpio Moon, Scorpio
Well,
rising, like just
the
to
other
be in the
part of
depths.
the other part of this though is that because you're coming in to make a splash and getting the hell out of after that, like energetically you make a big impact because you feel it all so you also project it all. And
Mhm.
so you're here to just like come in, feel it, project it, make a big impact, and then get the hell out rather
I
than
love that
have
for
like
me.
a very consistent earth experience of like learning
That
lessons.
builds upon itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I
Sorry for
really
that
resonate with
tangent, but I
that.
thought that was interesting.
That is, I
Yeah.
deeply resonate with that. Yeah.
But I think that coming back to why should somebody want to experience this full spectrum of emotions, I can use myself as an example here where growing up, I feeling things I don't think is ever something that I consciously like didn't feel comfortable with. And I do think that there is an aspect of the nervous system like becoming overloaded for some people. Their natural, it could be natural and it couldn't be like a learned thing, a conditioned thing where it becomes overloaded. Their window of tolerance for feeling is just narrower. And when they feel something in an extreme, whether that be in a positive way or negative way, it's just alarming. And so over time, it becomes narrowed because they don't allow themselves to feel the extremes of it. And that is something that just for anybody listening, you can't, it is an elastic. This window of tolerance, it's elastic, and it does have the capacity to be expanded over time, slowly and with consistent, patient, and careful practice of doing somatic work and emotional work. You can increase that window. But for me, I cut myself off from feeling positive things because I didn't feel like it was deserved or earned. That was a very conscious decision that I made. When I was
Yeah.
really little, I would say like high school. Um, and I was very hard on myself, and so I would feel a lot of the painful stuff, but I used that as fuel to try to earn feeling the good stuff. I
Hmm.
just never allowed myself to fully get there. So it did have a usefulness in that it propelled me into an area of discipline, self-discipline, where I was able to accomplish a lot.
Hmm.
And so I used those low end of the spectrum experiences of pain, of shame, to be very productive and efficient and accomplish quite a bit. And then over time, when I allowed myself to slowly titrate into opening up to feeling joy, to feeling self-love, to feeling self-compassion, because I had so much experience on the lower spectrum of things, my window of tolerance quickly opened on the other spectrum, other end of the spectrum too. And I was allowed to access very large quantities of self-love and joy and exhilaration and bliss and peace because my nervous system was already primed to feeling things to a large degree.
Wow.
And I felt very strong thing. I didn't realize what what unconditional love really felt like, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
And I don't know that most people do. And when I sit in meditation, I talk to spirit guides, it's an energy of unconditional love unlike anything I've ever felt before. And the ability to feel that has opened my eyes, has opened my insight and perspective, and has allowed me to make decisions in my life that I never would have allowed myself to make, that have led me in a place that has amplified those feelings even more. And it has allowed me to trust in me in a way that I wouldn't have been able to before. So it's provided me with not only experiences of myself that have been deeply impactful in a positive way, but it's also allowed me to make choices and take action in my life that I didn't allow myself to do before because I was so afraid of venturing back into the lower end of the spectrum and living there if I made a wrong choice or I did something wrong or it didn't work out the way I
Yeah.
wanted.
I think you just brought up a really good point too that I want to highlight, which is that emotion is what drives action. And there's so much that we can choose to experience in this human life. I mean, really, like we put a lot more limits on it than what's actually there. Like there's so many opportunities that we have to make a choice to experience something that we want to experience. And when we're living in these kind of more neutral, numb states, there's not really enough there to drive us into those experiences. Like when you're really attuned to a depth of emotion, grief is going to move you, joy is going to move you, curiosity is going to move you, excitement is going to move you. And I can see so many of the big decisions that I've made in my life were coming from an ability to sense an emotion that was moving me. Like the decision to sell my house randomly and move to the other side of the country and then start traveling and be nomadic for 2 years and to entertain certain relationships or to go up to a certain person and end up connecting with them. And like, there's just so many things that have enhanced my life experience and that have given me so many gifts of connection, of laughter, of joy, of abundance, of just fun and adventure that were driven from an action that I took from my ability to sense my emotionality.
The emotion was driving the action, but it's also what you were moving towards too, right? Like everything we do is in search of feeling something.
Yeah.
That's what we're wanting. You don't drive yourself crazy inside of your career so that you can be numb to feeling the satisfaction on the other side of it.
Even though that's what happens usually.
Right. But it's unconsciously what we're wanting is that feeling. And for me, what happened was the more I allowed myself to open up to it unconditionally, the more I felt it unconditionally. And it wasn't chasing the feeling anymore that was perpetuating my action, but my action was being perpetuated by the feeling just constantly being there. And so the action I was taking was very different. The energy behind the action I was taking was very different. And the outcome has been very different.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's literally
Yeah.
manifestation.
Right. Yeah. Which I love that as a jumping off point because something that you said in our pre-recording conversation was kind of expanding on something that we've mentioned in previous episodes that we're both kind of really annoyed with the world of manifestation.
Manifestation.
Manifestation. And that's why is that it's
Yeah.
so focused on intellectualizing and thinking. And like obviously, you know, if you're in the world of manifestation and law of attraction, blah blah blah, like they do kind of say like you gotta feel it or whatever, but they're that
They don't
they just
tell you
leave it at that.
how exactly. They
Yeah.
don't they don't go into detail about what that really means.
Hmm.
And feeling something when it's coming from a place of just wanting to feel it so that you can get a result, I'm just going to feel joy so that I can get the outcome that I want.
Hmm.
It's not really an authentic, energetic experience coming from a place of real joy. It's coming from a place of, I need this outcome. So I'm going to trick myself into feeling this thing because I don't feel whole unless I get the outcome that I want. And so
Right.
it's perpetuating this entire paradigm of I don't feel enough until I get what I want. And I'm going to utilize this cool thing called manifestation and apply it in the same way we do everything else,
Hmm.
which is to get to an end point that we feel like we are not deserving of experiencing unless it's done in our external reality.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
ultimately, the entire conversation, I mean, we're always manifesting. We're never not manifesting. What is manifestation? I mean, we can start with that. Manifestation is creation. What don't you create? Nothing. Everything you do is created through you. Everything. Every thought, every feeling, every action that you take, everything is manifested. And so when you're manifesting from a place of, I don't feel whole inside of who I am because this thing is missing, I need that thing in order to experience joy, connection, satisfaction, validation, love, then you are moving towards that thing from a place of feeling the opposite underneath
Mhm.
it all.
Yeah, and you're solidifying the reality where something is missing
Right.
because you're acting out of the energy of something is missing, and so that's going to perpetuate.
So, what is the fear and feeling the thing now unconditionally? I think that that's a real thing where, well, if I let myself feel satisfied with my life now, then I'll never get the thing I want.
Yeah, or I'll become lazy, or I'll become the type of person that people won't appreciate, or I won't be significant, or maybe if I get the thing, people will abandon me.
Yeah. There's almost like you cut yourself off, like I used to do. You cut yourself off from feeling the way you want to feel because it hasn't been earned yet, or you're afraid of what would happen if you did.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's almost this like titration process that needs to happen to find safety inside of feeling positive things too, not only feeling the lower vibrational, heavier things.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And if you are used to living in a spectrum of numbness or a very small spectrum of the emotional experience, my my idea behind that is that it's probably just going to be more difficult to manifest anything that you desire to consciously create, because what is going to be created is just going to be a byproduct of your unconscious, because that's what causes you to feel and what you're in the energy of. If you're not consciously choosing to expand into emotion and feeling, then your unconscious is more so running the show.
Yeah, I'm hearing that you're right about that. Yeah,
Because then our unconscious is more of our energy, because we're not
yeah.
consciously choosing it. We're not consciously feeling into our energy and the energy that we want to hold. And so whatever is lodged into our unconscious, our fears, our limiting beliefs, our traumas, like our nervous system spectrum, like that is what is going to be creating.
And ultimately, when you see people who are supposedly manifesting all of these great things, you really don't know that it's fulfilling for them what they're wanting it to.
Yeah,
And I think that that's where we can get caught up in looking to other people to say, well, they're doing it or they're doing
right.
it that way. You don't know what their experience of their manifestation is, which is ultimately what this comes down to. It's not the physical outcome, it's the experience of it.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to manifest
Yeah.
without realizing that's what you're doing.
Mm. So many rabbit holes to go down in this conversation about emotion and feeling. Do we want to try wrapping this with a bow?
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything else with this that you feel like we haven't touched on?
That we haven't touched on? I'm not sure. But what feels really alive for me to emphasize, because it feels like a truth that kind of emerged in our conversation that I wanted to circle back to and highlight, is that like you have to find it inside of yourself, a desire to feel more fully. And if that's not authentically there, like, cool, I invite you to at least explore whether it's there rather than just like unconsciously falling into this experience of reality that's kind of like neutral and numb and cut off to depths of joy and depths of suffering. But for me, through that conscious work and exploration, I was able to really sense a desire to feel more. And I was able to find that through just being honest about my dissatisfaction with life. And we've talked about this idea of like going through the motions and like everything just kind of feels like a means to an end. And that's how I remember most of my life. I look back on so many ages where I don't even have anything significant to note about that year, because I just like was trying to get somewhere else and going and doing the things that I was supposed to do to get to that other place. And I was isolated. I was numb. I was like spending all my free time just trying to conserve my energy so that I could do more to get to somewhere else. And that just saddens me to think of how much time that truly feels like a wasted part of my human experience that I could have been in more depth of everything. Even if that meant feeling more sadness, grief, fear, it it would have also meant more connection. It would have meant more love. It would have meant more joy, more ecstasy, more bliss, more laughter. And now that I've gotten to experience opening myself up to those things, it feels immensely worth it. But it came solely from starting to contemplate and be honest about how satisfied I was with the way that I was living my life. And that naturally engaged me in a several year, to be honest, journey of learning how to open. again. And I'm still in process of it, but I will never regret the work that it's required for me to really face my own blocks and to confront my closed heart and learn how to pry it open time and time again.
I feel really called to speak to anyone listening that's ever felt shamed for being too sensitive, or that's ever felt, me too, or that's ever felt like someone else has put you down, or that you've been made to feel less than because you wear your emotions on your sleeve and you have the ability to ride the wave of the extremes of your emotional experience. And I want you to know that what you're doing is experiencing the fullest expression of who you are. And that is literally such a gift. And
Wow.
because you're able to do that, the energetic frequency that you give off is potent and it's powerful. And don't let anyone dim your light inside of that. It's a power. It's it it's a power that sometimes makes other people uncomfortable because they don't know how to be with themselves inside of that full experience. Let
Hmm.
yourself enjoy it for the gift that it is for you, and create some incredible stuff from that energy.
Ah, yes. And the creation process feels so good.
Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you
Beep.
next week.